Hey everyone, we have loads of reading to do today, so you might see me in the same outfit in a lot of different videos. But today we are going to start with chapter 12, which is called Shadows. With her first trial over and the next one months away, Morgan was free to enjoy summer at the Hotel Deucalion. Days of splashing in sun-drenched jasmine courtyard pool gave way to balmy nights of ballroom dancing lessons, barbecue dinners, and long lounging sessions in smoking parlor, relaxing in vaporous clouds of vanilla smoke, to soothe the senses and bring happy dreams. If occasionally her thoughts drifted back to Crow Manor, if she remembered how grandmother was always slightly nicer in the summer, or wondered whether Ivy had yet had her baby, the thought was always quickly chased away by an invitation to help Charlie groom the horses or taste test the menu for Frank's next party. Sometimes Dame Chandra, who famously had 6 suitors, one for each night of the week except Sundays, she explained nonchalantly, would enlist Morgan's help to choose her outfit for the evening. Together they would dive through the thousands of beautiful gowns, shoes, and jewels in the soprano's wardrobe, which was nearly as big as the hotel lobby, to find the perfect ensemble for dinner and dancing with a man Jupiter had dubbed Monsieur Monday, a stroll in the park with Sir Wednesday of the midweek, or a night at the theater with the Honorable Lord Thursday. Life at the Deucalion brought fresh curiosities daily, like the time Kettigrew summoned the paranormal service men to remove a pesky ghost that had been walking through the walls of the 5th floor. Kettigrew said he didn't mind ghosts on the whole, as long as they didn't have any annoying habits, but this one kept coming back, he said. They were already on their 3rd visit from paranormal services, and while he had never seen the specter himself, the stories and rumors had so frightened some guests that he'd have to move them to another floor. Morgan was allowed to watch the exorcism, but wasn't quite impressive as she imagined. She'd been hoping to see a real ghost fly out of the building, but there was just a lot of sage burning and weird dancing, and the paranormal servicemen handed Kettigrew a bill for 450 cred and left. The most disappointing thing about the summer, however, much more disappointing than the exorcism, was that Morgan saw less and less of Jupiter. He was always being called away on business for the League of Explorers, or dashing off to endless meetings, dinners, and parties. Bad news, Mog. Jupiter slid down the curved marble banister one Thursday afternoon and landed in the foyer where Morgan and Martha were folding napkins into swans. Martha's swans looked perfect, like they could fly off in formation at any moment. Morgan's looked like drunk, angry pigeons. Can't take you and Hawthorne to the bazaar tomorrow at night. Something's come up. Again? Jupiter ran his hand through his bright copper hair, hastily tucked in his shirt into his trousers, and snapped his suspenders in place. Afraid so, old girl. The Nevermore Transportation Authority has sent again, Morgan repeated. The NTA had been sending messengers to fetch Jupiter from the Deucalion all summer long. They usually only needed help with echoes on the Gossamer line, whatever that meant. But 3 weeks ago, there had been another derailment, and this time 2 people had been killed. It was front news for a week, and the Deucalion had gone wild with rumors about who was responsible and what it might mean. Some of the staff got into such a state of panic that Jupiter had to ban anyone from uttering the word Wondersmith. I could take Morgan, offered Martha. Tomorrow's my night off, and Charlie's taking me, Mr. McAllister and I. Well, he's going to the bazaar, and he asked. I thought I might pop along, too. A crimson blush spread across Martha's face. It was common knowledge at the Deucalion that she and Charlie McAllister, the hotel chauffeur, fancied each other. They were the only ones who thought it was still a secret. That's all right, Martha. You and Charlie will have enough on your minds, Jupiter smirked. We'll go soon, Mog, promise. Morgan tried to hide her disappointment. The Nevermore Bazaar was a famous market festival that ran every Friday night all summer long. People came from all over the 7 Pockets just to see it, and a lot of them stayed at the Hotel Deucalion. Every Friday at dusk, excited guests ventured out in carriages and trains, and every Sunday morning they'd compare thrilling stories and photographs and purchases over brunch. But the summer was half finished, and Morgan still hadn't gone. Next week, she asked hopefully. Next week, definitely. He grabbed his long blue coat and threw open the front door, then paused to look back. Wait, not next week. I'm scheduled on a gateway. Phlox 2, terrible realm. All the blood-sucking insect swarms of Phlox 1, but none of the charm. He scratched his gingery beard and gave a helpless chuckle. We'll sort something out. Hey, Jack will be home from orchestra camp next weekend. He'll be here for the rest of the summer, so we can go together, all 3 of us, 4 of us, Hawthorne too. Morgan had almost forgotten that Jupiter's nephew lived at the Deucalion when he wasn't at boarding school. Martha said sometimes he came home on weekends, but so far there'd been no sign of him. Jupiter stepped back to grab his umbrella and paused to look at her strangely. Have you been having bad dreams? What? No, Morgan said hurriedly, glancing at Martha. The maid suddenly got busy counting her swans and pretending not to hear. Jupiter waved a hand around Morgan's head as if brushing away invisible flies. Yes, you have. They're hanging around you. What have you been dreaming about? Nothing, she lied. It's a show trial, isn't it? I told you not to worry about that. I'm not worried about it. Lie. All right, Jupiter nodded slowly, then leaned over her chair and whispered, I'm really sorry about the bizarre Moggers. Morgan, she corrected, reaching up to fix his collar, which had flipped in on itself. Never mind. Hawthorne said I can do something else. Jupiter nodded once, aimed a playful punch at Morgan's arm, and was gone. Next morning, there was a boy at Morgan's breakfast table, sitting in her chair, eating her toast. He was taller and older, perhaps 12 or 13, and though his face was mostly hidden behind a copy of the Sentinel, the top of his thick black hair was visible over the masthead. Flipping the pages of his newspaper and sipping blood orange juice, he leaned back his chair as if he owned the place. Morgan cleared her throat quietly. The boy didn't look up from his newspaper. She waited a moment, then coughed loudly. Go away if you're ill, he commanded. Another page flicked over. A slender brown hand emerged, took a piece of toast, and disappeared again behind the newspaper. I'm not, she said, taken aback at his rudeness. Guests aren't allowed down here. Are you lost? He ignored the question. If you don't have anything contagious, you can stay, but don't talk while I'm reading. I know I can stay. She stood up straight, making herself taller. I live here, and you're sitting in my chair. At this, the boy slowly lowered his newspaper to reveal a long, dark face, a look of extreme displeasure. One eyebrow arched smoothly, and his mouth curled into a scowl as he looked Morgan up and down. Being accustomed to this reaction when meeting new people, Morgan was less surprised by his disdain than by the black leather patch covering his left eye. She instantly recognized him from the school photo in Jupiter's study. John Arjona Carpardi. So this was Jack. He folded the paper and placed it on his lap. Your chair? You've lived here all of 5 minutes and you've claimed the furniture? I've lived here 5 years. This happens to be where I eat my breakfast. You're Jupiter's nephew. You're his candidate. He told you about me? Obviously, he snapped open the newspaper and buried his face in it once again. I thought you weren't coming till next weekend. You were misinformed. Jupiter's away. I'm aware of that. How come you're early? He sighed heavily, and the newspaper dropped. Uncle Job wouldn't tell me what your knack is. I can only guess you have the gift of annoying people while they're trying to read. Morgan sat across from him. You go to that Gray Pants school for clever boys, don't you? Gray's Mark School for bright young men, he snapped. Morgan smirked. She knew the right name. What's it like? Just dandy. How come you're not in the Wondrous Society like Jupiter? Did you try out? No. Jack folded his newspaper again, shoved a piece of toast in his mouth, and snatched his half-full teacup from the table before stomping out of the dining room and up the stairs. Morgan wondered where his bedroom was and what it looked like and where his parents lived and what happened to his eye and how come he didn't try out for the society and how she was going to make it through half the summer of this not very delightful company. As she reclaimed her favorite chair and piece of toast, She made a mental note to wake up earlier tomorrow and get there before Jack did. Someone probably gouged it out with a hot fire poker, said Hawthorne that night, as he and Morgan dragged out the board game chest in the smoking parlor. Rose smoke tonight, hazy and pink, to encourage sweetness of temper. Or stabbed it with a leather opener, or put flesh-eating insects under his eyelid and they ate it all up. Something like that. Ugh, Morgan shuddered. Who would do that? Someone with a reason not to like him, said Hawthorne. So it could be anyone he's ever met. Hawthorne grinned, and then, surveying the contents of the chest with a look of dismay, he said, We're not actually doing this, are we? We are, said Morgan, pulling out a colorful box. She was determined to have a good night, so that when he asked, she could honestly tell Jupiter it didn't matter the slightest that he'd canceled the promised trip to Nevermore Bazaar for the 5th week running. Not in the slightest. Happy Housewives? Oh, come on. I haven't played this since I was 10. Morgan ignored Hawthorne and began setting up the pieces. I'll be Mrs. Fuddledump, the kindly grandmother. You can be Miss Fierceface, the unsatisfied career woman. Not terribly modern, is it? I'll go first. She rolled the dice and moved her piece, picked up a card from the center of the board, and read, You have won a flower arranging contest. Collect your prize, an embroidered apron, the perfect thing to wear while cooking dinner for your hard-working husband. Don't forget to freshen your lipstick and fix your hair before he gets home. She put the card down immediately and began packing away the pieces. Fine, then who do you want to be? Fine, then what do you want to do? What do you think? Go to the Nevermore Bazaar, of course. My brother Homer is going with a bunch of his friends. I bet he'll let us come if we promise to pretend we don't know him. Can't. I'm not allowed to leave the hotel without Jupiter. Is that a rule, though? Hawthorne asked. Did he actually say that? Because if he didn't say it's a rule, it's probably more of a suggestion. Morgan sighed. There are 3 rules. I had to learn them by heart. 1, if a door is locked and I don't have the key, I'm not allowed in. 2, I mustn't leave the Deucalion without Jupiter. 3, I forgot 3. Something about the South Wing. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I can't go. Hawthorne looked thoughtful. Does that first rule mean if any door's unlocked, you're allowed in? Suppose so. He raised his eyebrows. Cool. They spent the next hour running up and down the hallways, rattling door handles, trying 6 floors before it got boring. The only unlocked rooms in the Deucalion seemed to be the rooms they've already visited a million times. But finally, on the 7th floor of the West Wing, just as a game of Happy Housewives was looking inevitable, inspiration struck. This looks familiar. Morgan rattled another locked door. It was different from the others on this floor. Instead of solid brass, the doorknob was made of twisted silver filigree and had a tiny opal bird on the top, its wings outstretched. This looks like... Oh, wait here. She ran all the way to the 4th floor, back, arriving out of breath but clutching her umbrella triumphantly. Hawthorne tilted his head, expecting bad weather. The silver tip fit the lock. Morgan twisted the oilskin umbrella and turned the handle. The door opened with a satisfying click, and she smiled. I knew it. How? Jupiter gave me this for my birthday, he explained, her excitement growing. Do you think he knew this would happen? Maybe he meant for me to figure it out. Yeah, Hawthorne said. He'd do something nutty like that. The room was large, echoing, and entirely empty but for a glass lantern in the center of the floor. It held a single lit candle, bright enough to cast a warm golden glow around the darkened room. Weird, muttered Hawthorne. It was an understatement, but Morgan was pretty sure there wasn't meant to be a lantern burning unattended in a locked room on the 7th floor. For one thing, it was probably a fire hazard. For another, it was spooky. As they got closer to it, the light from the lantern made their shadows huge and monstrous. Hawthorne cracked himself up by hunching his back and doing a zombie walk, groaning loudly for effect. He shuffled towards the candle, and a zombie shadow grew enormous on the wall behind him. Then something happened. Hawthorne stopped moving, but his shadow did not. It continued its zombie walk without him, taking on a life of its own and lumbering across the far wall until it melted into a dark corner and disappeared. Creepy, breathed Morgan. Very creepy, Hawthorne agreed. Let me try. She made a snake shadow puppet with her arm. It coiled away from her and slithered along the walls, striking angrily at the poor shadow bunnies Hawthorne sent hopping toward it. Morgan's slightly lame attempt at a cat became a roaring lion that stalked and ate every one of those bunnies. Hawthorne made a bird which turned into a bat that swooped down on its own shadow as if trying to scratch its eyes out. Their creations became more elaborate as they tried to outspook each other. They didn't even have to work very hard. It was as if the shadows were trying to be as scary as possible. A fish became a shark, became a circling school of sharks, became a swirling hurricane of giant sharks with Hawthorne's and Morgan's shadows at the center. It was terrifying and thrilling and so cool. I'm gonna make, Hawthorne said, and his tongue sticking out of his mouth as he bent his fingers into a complicated, unrecognizable shape. A dragon. And suddenly his blobby shadow became a great reptilian beast. It loomed large on the wall, its black wings beating monstrously as it took flight. It soared and swooped around their heads, shot shadowy black flames from behind its terrifying jaws. Hawthorne made a shadow horse, and the dragon burned it to a crisp and gobbled it up in 3 sickening bites. Morgan and Hawthorne screamed as they watched it dive down and pick up Hawthorne's shadow and its talons, flying into the distance while Shadow Hawthorne's black limbs flailed. Their screams turned into laughter. I think I just won, Hawthorne said with a smug grin. Firstly, it's not a competition, said Morgan, and secondly, I'm going to win. They sat on the floor with a lantern between them, and Morgan flexed her fingers. If Hawthorne thought he could outscare Jekyll of Flax's scariest citizen, he was kidding himself. Let me tell you a story. She twisted her hands into something that looked roughly like a person. Once upon a time, a little boy was walking along in the woods. She made some tall, waving trees, and the shadow boy walked obediently among them. His mother always told him not to walk in the woods alone. There was a witch who lived there, and her favorite thing was to eat chopped up little boys on toast. But the boy didn't listen because he liked to pick the berries that grew in the forest. Morgan hunched over into what she thought was a suitably witch-like shape. Her fingers bent into claws. Her shadow did the rest, transforming into a spooky old woman, complete with hooked, warty nose and pointed hat. The shadow witch stalked the boy through the trees. He thought he knew the forest, but he got lost and couldn't find his way out. He walked for hours and hours. Night fell, and the forest grew dark. Morgan made an owl that suddenly took flight, shaking the branches of a tree. The shadow boy looked over his shoulder and shivered, and so did Hawthorne. Suddenly, he heard a cranky old voice from behind him. "Who's that walking in my woods?" called the witch. "Who's been picking my berries?" The boy tried to run, but the witch plucked him by the scruff of his neck and carried him home to her chopping board, cackling all the way. Morgan was particularly proud of her cackle. As she lifted her knife high into the air, a howl pierced the night. Morgan made a dog shadow puppet, which turned into a wolf, then a pack of wolves. They circled the witch and the boy, growling viciously. She hadn't meant to make so many of them, but the shadows had ideas of their own, and they were too good at this. Morgan needed to take control before the story got away from her. Finally, she said, grasping for a hasty ending. The boy heard his mother calling for him in the distance. She came riding to his rescue on their trusty old horse, Sergeant Clop, and the boy cheered as she saw them galloping over the hill. Morgan's shadow puppet horse did indeed gallop toward the boy, the witch, and the wolves, but there was no heroic mother on its back coming to save the day. There was no mother at all, only a towering skeletal man holding a long black rifle. "I didn't make that," whispered Morgan, cold fear rising up in her throat. The shadows had hijacked the story. The brigade of horses swelled up behind the first, each bearing a ghostly hunter at their reins. The shadow witch and the shadow boy faded into darkness, and the wolves loomed larger and larger as they surrounded Morgan and Hawthorne. Morgan screamed. She ran for the door with Hawthorne close behind, and only when they emerged in the bright light of the hallway did Morgan realize they weren't being chased. "What's wrong?" said Hawthorne. "That was getting good." She shook her head, trembling. That wasn't meant to happen. The hunt of smoke and shadow wasn't meant to be in the story. The hunt of what? Morgan took a shaky breath and told Hawthorne the story of her 11th birthday. Once she started, it all came tumbling out about the eventide curse, about how she was meant to die. Then Jupiter came and they were chased by the hunt of smoke and shadow and went through the clock, and how she ended up at the Hotel Deucalion, and how she really didn't have a knack or even a clue of what she was doing there. She even told him the most painful, scary part about Inspector Flittock, and how if she didn't get into the society, she'd be forced to leave Nevermore and face the hunt again. Hawthorne stayed quiet until she'd finished, and for a little while after, he looked dazed. Morgan watched him, biting her lip, worried she'd said too much. Perhaps she should have left out the bit about coming to the Republic and being in Nevermore illegally, and the bit about the curse, and all the other bits. No offense, he said, but that story's way better than the one you made up. The air left Morgan's lungs in a whoosh. It was typical of Hawthorne to take the strangeness of her life in stride, but she was deeply relieved nonetheless. Hawthorne, you have to keep it a secret, Morgan said. I wasn't supposed to tell. If anybody finds out, if Inspector Flittock... Hawthorne held out his finger. Morgan Crow, he said solemnly, I pinky promise to keep your secret and not tell another soul. Hawthorne held out his little finger. Morgan Crow. Oh, sorry, I already said that. You pinky what? Pinky promise. He pushed his little finger closer to her face. I've never broken a pinky promise in my life. Never. She hooked her pinky into his, and they nodded. Now, he said, frowning, please tell me this bit about getting chased through the clock by the hunters with guns while driving a giant spider again. 1. But she didn't have a chance because suddenly Morgan noticed 2 things. 1, they'd left the door to the creepy room of creepiness open. 2, her shadow wolves had escaped and was stalking down the hallway. Maybe it faded away, Hawthorne moaned as they searched the kitchens for the 3rd time. They'd looked all over the hotel, but the shadow wolf eluded them. All the others did. But what if it didn't? What if it comes across a guess? They'd be scared to death. Their family will sue the Deucalion, and Jupiter will kill me. We have to find it before someone sees it. Morgan didn't know how she was going to get rid of the wolf if she ever did catch it. But she couldn't think about that now. Before someone sees what? It was the last voice she wanted to hear. Jack stood in a corner of the kitchen, pouring a glass of milk. Nothing, she said quickly. None of your business. He rolled his good eye. If there's something wandering around scaring people to death, it is my business. I don't want to stumble over dead bodies on my way to bed. What is it? You wouldn't believe it. Try me. They told him. Jack listened with increasing annoyance. For goodness sake, if you're going to leave a pack of killer wolves in the Hall of Shadows, at least shut the bloody door behind you. It's locked for a reason. How did you even get in? I realized that. Forget it. Jack held up a hand to stop her. Don't make me your accomplice. Jupiter's going to be furious. As much as Morgan didn't want to admit, it was a stroke of good luck that Jack was there because he knew an awful lot more about the hotel than she did. He led them to a maintenance closet and pulled out 3 battery-powered flashlights. Right, we're going to have to split up. I'll take the east wing. He pointed at Hawthorne, take the west wing. And Morgan, you take the north wing. If you find the wolf, shine your flashlight directly on it at the highest setting. Don't let it get away. Keep shining light on it until it fades. It won't be in places like kitchens and hallways. It'll be somewhere darker, where the other shadows like to hide. If you corner it in a room, and you can get to a light switch, flick it on, and flood the room with light. If not, your flashlight should do the job. Now, this is important. Do not stop searching until you find it, even if it takes all night. Morgan didn't like the idea of splitting up. The last thing she felt like doing was wandering around in the dark, looking for a giant, ravenous shadow wolf on her own. But what could she do? It was her fault the thing was out there. She had to find it. The north wing was surprisingly dark. She crept down the black stairwells, through unlocked rooms, unsure whether a shadow could hear her coming, but unwilling to take the risk. It was hard to know what to look for in the dark. How do you find a shadow in the shadows? After what felt like hours searching, Morgan was ready to give up when she heard a sound from the moonlight balcony of the 5th floor drawing room. Somebody was out there looking at the sky and singing quietly. The sound drifted inside, and though Morgan couldn't quite make out the words, she recognized the melody and the man. She held the gauzy white curtains aside and stepped into the balcony, into the bluish light of a full moon. The beam of her flashlight fell across the man's face. Mr. Jones? He was jolted out of his reverie. Miss Crow, hello again. Another visit, Morgan observed. You must come to Nevermore a lot. Yes, I have business here on occasion, and I like to visit friends. He smiled a little sheepishly, holding up a hand to shield his eyes. Morgan lowered her flashlight. I don't believe the Wintersea party would approve, but what they don't know won't hurt them. Our deal still stands, I hope. You won't tell on me. As long as you don't tell on me, Morgan shivered. The evening breeze had a bite. What are you doing out here? Oh, I was just looking for the music salon. I thought it was somewhere near my suite, but I suppose I got a bit lost. The Deucalion still baffles me after all these years. I passed this charming spot and I couldn't resist a moment of reflection under the stars. His voice was wistful. Such a beautiful evening. Yes, it is. From the corner of her eye, Morgan saw something move in the drawing room. She threw back the curtains and swung her flashlight around, but it was only the branch of a small potted tree swaying in the breeze from the open door. Where is it? She whispered. Are you looking for something? Yeah, but you probably wouldn't believe me if I told you. He smiled gently. I'm certain I would. She told him about the Hall of Shadows. He barely raised an eyebrow. And then one of the shadows I made escaped, and now it's running around the hotel, and I have to find it before it scares anybody to death. And Jupiter loses all his business and goes bankrupt. Jack says the only way to kill it is to shine a light on it until it fades away. Mr. Jones didn't laugh at her, or call her a liar, or even express the smallest amount of surprise. You created this shadow on your own? Sort of. It sort of created itself. He looked oddly impressed by that. It's a scary shadow, you said? They're all scary. Even if you make a nice one like a kitten, it will turn into a man-eating tiger or something. It's like they're trying to be scary. That makes sense. Morgan was surprised. Does it? Shadows are shadows, Miss Crow. His eyes reflected the moonlight. They want to be dark. Morgan swung her flashlight wildly about the room, hoping to catch the wolf by surprise if it was there. The beam began to shudder and fade. She whacked the side of the flashlight. I think my batteries are dying. With one last flicker, the light went out. She groaned. I doubt it matters, said Mr. Jones. Miss Crow, I suspect your friend, the one who told you how to kill the shadows, he's not my friend, was merely having fun at your expense. He smiled, not unkindly. Your rogue shadow has almost certainly faded away on its own. Morgan frowned. How do you know? I've been staying at the Deucalion for many years. I hope I've learned a few of her secrets in that time. As I understand it, anything from inside the Hall of Shadows is nothing but an illusion, just a bit of theater. It can't harm anyone. Do you guys believe him? I don't. I'm just curious. Are you sure? Quite sure. Morgan felt relief wash over her, followed by cold fury. Had she really just wasted a bazillion hours chasing nothing? Jack, I'm gonna kill him. Mr. Jones chuckled. Pity you can't send a real wolf to teach him a lesson. Now I'm afraid I must get myself to bed. I'm checking out in the morning. Good night, Miss Crow. And remember, my employer's offer is always open. He was well and truly gone by the time Morgan's realized she'd never told him the shadow was a wolf. What are you? You were supposed to be looking in the north wing. The cavernous foyer was dim and empty but for Jack lounging in a love seat and reading a cloth-bound book. The chandelier slowly growing, twinkled feebly over her head. Still in infancy, Jack shined his flashlight at Morgan's face, nearly blinding her as she emerged from the hall. I was, you rat. Morgan glanced back the way she came. That is the north wing. No. He looked slightly panicked. That's the south wing. It's closed for renovations. It's unsafe. You're not supposed to enter under any circumstances. Can't you read? He pointed to a sign that said, closed for renovations, unsafe, do not enter under any circumstances. Morgan had walked right past it. Whoops. Well, it's your fault, she sputtered. You lied, Jack. We didn't need to chase that stupid wolf at the hotel at all. Did anybody see you in there? Feenster would kill. Who cares about the south wing? You knew the shadow would disappear on its own, didn't you? You liar. Jack didn't look remotely guilty. It's not my fault you're gullible. Try having a brain next time. He scowled and shook his head, muttering, I can't believe my uncle thinks you belong in the Wondrous Society. Can't even read a sign. Are you jealous? Is it that? Morgan threw the flashlight down beside him. Jealous he chose me as his candidate and not you? Jack's eyes narrowed. What? Did you just... Jealous? Of you? Why would I be jealous of you? You don't even have a knack, you said to yourself, outside the hall of... Morgan gasped. You were spying on us. At that moment, Hawthorne bounded into the foyer, shining his flashlight into his face and laughing manically. Mwahaha! I am Hawthorne, killer of shadows. Fear me, Shadow Wolf, for I am your doom. You're too late, Shadow Killer, said Morgan, grabbing his flashlight and tossing it to Jack. The shadow's already dead. Oh, Hawthorne's shoulders slumped. But I was going to make a victory song for when I vanquish it. I was going to teach you the dance bit. Morgan led him to the gold and glass elevator, speaking loudly enough for her voice to echo in the foyer. Maybe you can rewrite the words to be about Jupiter's weasel of a nephew who spies on people and tells lies and makes everyone hate him. Or about Jupiter's talentless candidate who's too stupid to know how shadows work and runs around a hotel making an idiot of herself, called Jack, settling back into the love seat with a book. Morgan jabbed the button for her floor, still seething. Hawthorne hummed, turning to her as the door closed. What rhymes with weasel of a nephew? All right, we'll read chapter 13 soon. It is called The Chase Trial.